What's up, paddlers? Welcome to the Lazy Paddler Investor Show. This is part 4 of our review of the annual report from Activision Blizzard. Today we're looking at the business and industry risks section of the 10K. You know, it's the section that if you ever read a 10K, you skip over. What the heck are these risks? How do we evaluate them? I'll be sharing my thoughts. My name is Harlan Bea, and I'm making these long-form reviews to help us all become better long-term investors, to share how I think about investing and how I think about the future. Before we get started, just a few reminders. I'm an individual investor and these opinions are my own. I'm not speaking for any companies I work for or manage. I may own shares in most of the companies I'm going to discuss on my shows, so I do not recommend that you buy or sell any of the stocks I discuss. Remember, always do your own research before you make your own decisions about your own investments. So, like this video and smash that subscribe button, if you please. Also, let me know in the comments whether you would be interested in a live stream of this content or what companies you would like me to cover, because eventually I'm going to branch out and do a little bit more short-form content. With that done, let's get into the weeds. All right. So, business and industry risks. Couple of things comes to mind as I look at this right now. I'm going to go really quickly through here and just kind of get bullet points of what some of these risks are that they're calling out, just to give myself a general sense of what they are, and then I'm going to come back to the top and we'll talk about each of them individually, maybe. But one of the things I'm looking for here is things that are missing, right? Risks that are missing, because there are things that I believe are risks, things that are risks for me personally, and things that are risks for society in general, and things that may be risks for the company also, but may not be risks for the company. So like, as an investor, we have different considerations about our personal risks than a company would. For example, when COVID-19 hit in 2019, or I guess kind of came to American shores in 2020, there were varying effects on different industries, and different companies in different industries were hit in different ways. For some, it was a boon, and for others, it was a catastrophe. And yet others sort of shrugged and said, COVID-19 doesn't really affect us too much. So let's figure out a little bit about what they think their risks are, and let's also think a little bit about what what I think the risks are. I'll be doing that. I say we, but I guess we as a group. If you want to comment, if you think there are some risks here that I'm missing, please let me know down in the comments below and we'll have a discussion. So that's awesome. And like I said in the intro, when I go through this, usually I almost always ignore it. And I think that's a necessary part of being an investor. You have to learn what to focus on. The risks are almost always similar across industries. So if you are familiar with the risks in a particular industry, say vehicle manufacturing, right? Then the risks are pretty much the same for all vehicle manufacturing companies because they all depend on the same types of economic conditions, social conditions, value chains, product chains. So if you're aware of what an industry is and how it functions, you don't need to spend too much time going over this type of thing in every single company that you invest in an industry, right? So if you invest in a lot of cloud service providers, for example, the risks are going to be fairly similar for Box.com as they are for Dropbox, as they are for whoever else. I can't think of others like that. I don't think I invest in either of those companies, but if you did, they're They're different, obviously, but they're risks. They're sort of generalized risks are going to be similar. So you can kind of think about them the same way. Same thing with manufacturers, truck manufacturers, airline manufacturers, even airlines, all kinds of things. They kind of group together, and one thing that's bad for one of them may not be bad for all of them, may be bad for all of them as well. Some things can be localized, like strikes. They may hit a particular company, but also they may hit a particular industry. So you don't necessarily know which company it's going to hit, but the effect of a strike, you kind of understand the effect of a strike on an airline, right? So it doesn't matter if one airline or another gets hit with a strike. You kind of go, well, I generally understand what that could mean. It's probably bad for the airline, right? Hopefully it's good for the people who are striking. So and there are gives and takes to all these things. Another thing in the risks area I would stress is that just because something's in the risk area doesn't mean it's always going to be bad for your company. Again, like COVID-19, and we'll go down here and we'll kind of see what there is, see what they're giving us to talk about, and then we'll maybe add some things of our own. Okay. And I'm going to do a little art in here today. We'll maybe highlight some things as we go through. Okay, let's see. They're talking about cyclicality of game preferences. Sure, difficult to predict. Sure, okay. Enhancements may not be well received. Reviews may suck. Large corporate, wow, they're sort of just running the gamut of like problems that they could get. Large competition, budgets. They may be imitated. Let's see, competing projects. This is kind of like about competition and quality issues. Quality received games. Marketing fails to resonate. So this is like quality and consistency and competition. Consumer preferences. Okay. So this is basically the top line here. Okay. And then this is consumer expectations. Okay. Criticality. Wow. Okay. I get it. Bugs. Quality, online features. Okay, cool. Delays in product releases. Yeah. Disruptions following. Yeah, okay. Lead time and cost. All right, so some of these things are going to be like risks, and other things I'm going to dispute that these things are actually risks. So this is not what I would call a risk. And we'll talk about that when we get back to it. So this is like lead time and costs. All right. Depend on a relatively small number of franchises. This is true. Okay, so they have a franchise model, and so they're depending on Call of Duty, Candy Crush, and WoW. World of Warcraft, which people call WoW. WOW is the acronym for it. So I may call Call of Duty COD or COD. Candy Crush, I don't think anyone bothers acronyming that. And then WoW is World of Warcraft. No more franchises to discuss. Okay. If we don't continue, that's assuming that they were successfully doing so in the beginning. That's an interesting word right there. Skilled personnel. Okay, so attract, retain, and motivate. That's interesting. Yeah, so this definitely a risk. And yeah, especially this year. I saw some news this morning that they let go some Raven QA, quality assurance folks, and they're thinking about, other people are thinking about striking. It's not that many people, it's like 30 people in the reporting, but QA departments are getting thinner and thinner, and QA is vitally important to hitting your timelines on things. So, you know, stuff that they think might be coming out on a certain date might not be coming out if those people decide to strike. So this is a lack of motivation. And it affects their ability to attract and retain as well. Our industry is subject to rapid technological change. So they have to adapt and allocate resources and emerging technologies. Again, I don't feel like this is a risk. So this is like what you do. Is this a risk? It's like, all right. So I'm going to talk about risks and my ideas of what things. Here, this is like, is this a risk? I don't know. We're going to put a little Riddler question mark after these things that we don't know if they're risks. I would dispute that they're actually risks, but we'll talk about it. Why I dispute that. Technology changes rapidly. Yes, it does. That's forecasting. Investments, distribution channels, opportunity cost. Oh, we'll talk about opportunity cost as well. This is a good thing to discuss. I don't think we've discussed opportunity cost yet. But will you ever know? Yeah. So this is why this is. All right, I'll talk about this when we get here. I guess the question is, will you ever know that you've screwed up here? I think your audiences will criticize you for having missed the boat on things, but there's a huge question mark as to whether or not this is an actual risk. Again, we'll talk about what risk means to me and why I don't believe that's a risk. I believe this is just a bad business decision. So that's how I would impact this. It may be a risk to us as investors, but I don't see it as a risk to the company. It's more like a consequence of their decision making. Well, here we go. So increasing importance of digital sales. Risks of that business model. I dispute this entirely. I don't actually think this is a risk. Proportion of revenues derived from digital distribution compared to traditional resale. Increased importance. They have higher profit margins than retail sales. But volume of orders from retailers of physical discs gets reduced. Some of the providers of the platforms are also publishers of their own content. Okay, yeah, I suppose so. All right. Importance of retail sales to our business exposes us to the risks of that business model. This is ridiculous. The risks of the business model. Purchase order basis without long-term agreements. All right. Okay. So they're basically saying, look, if we lose some of our big distributors, we could lose a lot of money. Yeah. Yeah, you could, which is why, like, all right, so, yeah, you could, yes. I guess if you have problems selling stuff, that's an issue. Some of that is within their control and some of it is not. I guess there are some risks there. We'll see. Maybe I can make it. I'll erase that and I'll erase that. We'll call these real risks, but I question their like the actual problems they're going to have with these. We may be unable to effectively manage the continued growth and scope and complexity of our business. You think? Significant growth. Development of esports. Yeah, they basically threw away their entire esports team recently. I was rereading some things on that. I think they let their entire esports team go. I doubt they would have let go of everyone involved with esports. I mean, I don't know. A lot of times when you see news of layoffs from companies, it may be people in a team who are gone, but there may be other people who are kind of taking up those responsibilities afterwards. It's difficult sometimes to know exactly how things are being structured inside of a company from outside. So news reports a lot of times are shades of reality. They're not entirely trustworthy. So I don't know. I'll go into this a little bit later. That's interesting here, I guess. Yeah, managing is problems for them. Due to reliance on third-party platforms, they're able to frequently influence our products and costs. Are they really? But that's capitalism. Let's put a little note here. All right. Manufacturers may seek to change the terms. Sure. Sure. Okay. Again, is this a risk or is this business as usual? I would say for them, this is business as usual. So, yeah, interesting. Okay. This is key. They're saying the networks provided by the platform providers, such as Sony, Microsoft, they're an they are the exclusive means of selling and distributing their content on those platforms. So, so there, I suppose, is a risk to the control that those other companies have over them. But again, I feel like this is business as usual. This is something that they have contractual relationships going with, and just social protections for it, all antitrust legal things, as well as just people's demand in the marketplace. So let's go on down here. So that they're also talking about the Apple App Store, Google Play Store, Facebook. Again, let me disclose a little bit here. I do not own Sony. I own some Microsoft. I own some Google, or Alphabet, they call it. I own some Apple. I do not own Facebook. I sold off all my Facebook because I have a moral objection to Facebook. I believe that they are a problematic company. Worse than Activision in many ways. I have still a lot of investment in Activision. Oh, also, just so you know, I sold off part of my Activision investment. Going to be selling more of it. Going to be reducing my holdings in Activision. I may not sell it all, but I just wanted you to know it's not like all or nothing all the time for me. Sometimes I will go, well, this thing's not worth as much. This thing does not belong in my portfolio as high a amount as it used to be. That's what I'm basically saying. I'm like, they could do better in the future. There are some green lights I see at Activision Blizzard. There are some good things that I see. But right now, there's just a river of shit flowing out at both the customers and the investors, and the employees. I'm not happy. So even though the stock's down right now, I am selling it off because I'm looking to invest in other things, which I already have started buying with money I took from this. So that's good. Looking forward to a better future. And Activision does not have my full confidence. All right, let's see. Direct competitors in some cases. Yes, these platforms also serve as significant online distribution platforms. Yeah. Okay, we get it. I get it. You're not saying anything different. Right. Platforms they may break. They may have bugs. They may break. May not function. They actually lose a lot of sales because of that. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Our business is highly dependent on the success and availability of video game consoles. Yeah, I suppose so. Manufactured by third parties. Yeah. Okay. I suppose there is some risk there if the consoles weren't going to be made. But again, this is capitalism in action. Capitalism with a Z, because I mistyped, but I like it. All right, cool. That's not how you spell capitalism. If you're watching and you're like thinking, wow, does he not know how to spell? I do. I do know how to spell. I did see the little red underline underneath that said that was wrong, but I like it. Capitalism. Okay, get a lot from these consoles and costs. Yeah. All right, if they don't make the consoles, they can't sell their games. Okay, I get that. Do you really need 2 paragraphs to explain this to me? I don't know. Maybe you do. I get it. Operating must. Yeah. Whatever. Okay. Increasing importance of free-to-play games to our business exposes us to the risks of the model, including the dependence on a relatively small number of consumers for a significant portion of revenues and profits. Okay. Is this a risk? This is a choice. We're going to talk about the difference between risks and choices. Okay. Risks and choices. All right, so they have free-to-play in COD, COD Mobile, Hearthstone, Candy Crush, and I'll also say StarCraft 2, because I know StarCraft 2 went to free-to-play as well, like a year or 2 ago, something like that. Anyway, I know people are always coming on there with new accounts, and it's sort of irritating because they're always finding new games and trying to place themselves. And I'm like, it seems like there shouldn't be that many, but I guess existing players just get new accounts and then they start them up. It's sort of weird. So they're trying to basically encourage people to pay optionally as they consume the product, just for these virtual items, right? Okay. They got to price things, and yeah, okay. Again, I dispute that this reduces sales of other games. Again, this is a choice. This is not a risk. This is a business plan. So this is them saying, we don't know if our business plan is right. We don't know if our business plan is good. I respect that they're letting us know that they may be wrong. I respect that. I get it. But this is a choice, not what I would consider a risk. Okay, let's move on. We may not realize the expected benefits of recent restructuring actions. Oh my. And they may negatively impact your business. Again, choices. Choices. Restructuring. If we sell off companies that we used to own, and now we can't make those things that those companies made anymore, or if we get rid of people that used to do things for us, and those people are no longer doing those things for us, there may be negative consequences. Imagine that. Imagine negative consequences coming from throwing away your employees. Is that a risk or a choice? We're going to move on. All right, let's see. Our ability to attract and retain highly skilled employees. You can tell I'm not reading all of this in depth. These have been going rather long, so I'm trying to go through these a little bit more quickly. But you kind of get the feel for each of these from the headline. So I'm going to talk about these in terms of overarching strategies and real risks. So these risks, these are so far these risks are very unimaginative. Unrealistic. They express things that are kind of well understood by folks who participate in any sort of industry watching. It's good that they outline them, I guess, especially for people who may not be cognizant of the gaming industry. Like, I will say that when I'm investing in an industry where I am not a consumer of it, where I don't actually do the thing. So, for example, I appreciate these risks being outlined a little bit more because it gives me some flavor of, I guess, like what the shape of their industry looks like from within and what they're thinking about it from inside the company in terms of how they interact with distributors or manufacturers or things like that. Like that sort of thing is sometimes helpful to me. Like if I was to buy shares of a company that makes electronic components, for example, or solar equipment, like I might want to know more about it because I'm not always purchasing solar things or electronics, and I may not ever purchase it from that company, right? Maybe they're local to a particular area, maybe they're in Florida, or maybe they're in Europe, and I just am not in the market. And so I'm still interested in buying the company, but I don't really have a good idea of what their risks are in their industry. Some things like this can help me understand it, but I feel like it doesn't necessarily belong here in this risk section. I'd prefer a more detailed discussion of it in the business section. And I mean, it's fine, I guess, but when I say it's unimaginative, there are real risks I have in my head right now that I want to see discussed, and they're not yet here. Maybe we're not far enough along. We'll see. Let's keep going. So, strategic transactions, they engage in strategic transactions. I guess this means like buying and selling of their businesses or business components, and may encounter difficulties in integrating acquired businesses. Sure. Or realizing the anticipated benefits in the transactions. True. Okay. There's all kinds of things that can happen here. And they're just laying down the kitchen sink and everything that goes along with it. Unexpected tax consequences. Difficulty integrating the business. Its employees may hate us. Do they have liabilities that we didn't know about? Do they have risk of loss of key employees? Do they have legal interests or goals that were inconsistent with ours? Maybe they couldn't meet its obligations. Yeah, okay. It's interesting that they're not specific here about the things that they have actually purchased and gone into actual risks. This feels like it was copied and pasted out of 10K 101, or like basic 10K forms manual. We are exposed to seasonality in our sales of our products. Again, not a risk. Yeah, people buy things more in the holiday season. Is that a risk? I mean, it all comes down to people may not buy our stuff all the time. And there are a lot of reasons why. They may hate us. The stuff may suck. It may not be the holidays. But all of this is like well known. So I'm like, again, I'm going to discuss I'm all leading into when I'm actually going to discuss my risk concept with you. So it's complex, so I don't want to interrupt it right now. I want to see how far this goes so that I get a feeling for like how deep I need to dig here. Maybe they're going to redeem themselves in the next couple paragraphs. We'll see. We're starting to get to the end, though, I think. Business may be harmed if distributors, retailers, development, or licensing partners, or third parties with whom we are affiliated act in ways that put our brand at risk. What are they trying to say here? Esports leagues, sensitive and proprietary information, intellectual property control, unauthorized use. Oh, they're talking about leaks. Leaks, disclosures, operations, disruptions, that sort of thing. Okay, cool. They use this phrase, vis-a-vis. I love it. That's so pretentious. I know I use pretentious words myself, but it takes one to know one, right? This is quality phrasing. Okay, we use open source software in connection with certain of our games and services. Yeah, I bet they do. And those have risks. Yes, they do. And they could negatively impact your business. I would say this actually is a risk. This is a risk. I'm down with this one. This is okay. I'm actually we may want to discuss this a little bit more. That's an interesting risk, and that's something that I didn't have in mind as we were kind of walking through this. I like that they call this out. Not that I wouldn't have thought of it necessarily if I kind of went through it, but it shows that they're calling out something that they have given thought to, that they are depending on, and it is definitely something that could be a problem for them. And I'll talk about this because I've got some experience with this myself. Open source stuff is great, but also a little bit risky at times. So they have license issues, compliance issues with licenses. They may have to release their source code. Interesting. Breach of contract, re-engineering fees, discontinued distribution. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. They're a global company and subjects to the risks and uncertainties of conducting businesses outside the U.S. Okay, so Europe and Asia. Yeah. Ooh, risks outside the U.S. Um, there are risks of doing business everywhere. There was a time when I would have said there are significantly more risks to doing business in overseas outside of the United States as a blanket statement, but I don't think that you can make that blanket statement anymore. I feel like this is not entirely true. This is not accurate in all cases. There are some places where they definitely have higher risks than others. So authoritarian countries pose a significantly higher risk than democratic countries. Doing business in China, for example, is significantly more risky than doing it in the United States or, say, Germany, right? So equating countries in Europe with countries in Asia, like there's a whole spectrum of differences country by country in Europe and in Asia, and it's not necessarily that they are from those continent areas. It's more that because they have significant sales in places like China, I assume they have significant sales in China. Yeah, here we go. To operate in China, all games must have regulatory approval. So I'm assuming they do have significant sales in China. And this, the, all right, so China. China's a huge risk all by itself. Um, okay. All right, we're going to talk about this a little bit more when I come back. I hope. I hope I have time to. I do have a meeting later, so we'll see how that goes. Game approval procedures changing. Okay. Cultural differences. Cultural differences. This is not a risk. They have to modify their content of their games. Oh, this is hilarious. Censorship. So we're going to talk about censorship here. Could negatively impact business. We're also subject to risks. Our operations outside of the United States could be conducted by our employees, contractors, third-party providers in ways to violate Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, UK Anti-Bribery Act, or anti-bribery laws in general, Finances Act, so in ways that violate, right. So this is bribery. Coercion, is that how you spell coercion? Right now I guess the C, coercion. Wow, that's how you spell coercion. I guess I haven't actually written that down recently. Interesting. Okay. Games may include undisclosed content or features. Objectionable undisclosed content. I would even say just objectionable content. It could have a negative impact on business. So undisclosed is this weird. Are they saying they're not disclosing it to us? they talking about with this undisclosed? I'm actually kind of curious. Let's see. Included hidden content or hidden gameplay features. Okay, through in-game codes intended to enhance. So they're talking about cheat codes and like hidden areas, Easter eggs, that sort of thing. Things that people use for speedrunning, or just folks who are like hunters go through and make content trying to find stuff. Publishers are required to disclose pertinent hidden content during the ESRB ratings process. In a few cases, publishers have failed to disclose hidden content, and ESRB has required the recall of the game, changing the rating or associated content descriptors originally assigned. Okay, so they're basically saying if they hide something, the ESRB could come back and say, yeah, you're going to have to go through ESRB review again. Recall, okay. Why would people refuse to purchase the game's objectionable material? I'm not thinking, I can't even think of a time that this has happened. I mean, I'm very familiar, obviously, with, Easter eggs and things being hidden in games and hidden areas and stuff like that. But I'm imagining that there were some people who were like, you could put in a cheat code and all of a sudden everybody in the game is naked and having sex and smoking meth or something. I don't, or like cursing at you or have, I don't know, yelling about Tiananmen Square to shout out to the Chinese. You're going to be blocked by them, I'm sure. Wow. So I guess they're afraid that they're going to put something in there. Their designers theoretically could jam something in there, I suppose. It's possible. They have preventative measures, but they're subject to human error. Yeah. It's true. There are some people who just have access to things and they can just stick it in there, or there may be collusion between the people who are reviewing code or reviewing the stuff and then decide to put something into a copy. Like I'm imagining that maybe there were, like, here's an example. Say there are some pro-democracy folks on staff for Activision Blizzard and they're like, we're going to collude together and we're going to stick in some code highlighting the disaster at Tiananmen Square when the Chinese government attacked their own citizens, right? And they decide to collude and stick that into the next Call of Duty. I mean, they could just put in text at some point, and then it just comes up at a certain point in the game, and like ESRB doesn't know about that, and so it's never been disclosed. And even if it was disclosed, ESRB wouldn't necessarily stop it. Chinese censors might try to stop it, right? And then the Chinese government would come down on them and say, no, Activision, you're banned. You can never, ever sell anything in China again. Just like the Chinese are probably going to say, lazy paddler, you're not allowed to share your opinions in China. Okay, cool. So that means, I guess that is a real risk. That is a real risk. 'Cause that could happen, and that's like, it's in their control, but it could be bypassed. They have controls in place, but they may not always work. I get it. Okay. Results of operations or reputation may be harmed as a result of objectionable consumer or third-party created content. Esports broadcasts, online features, communication. Uh, you know, is this a risk? User-generated content. They may be subject to lawsuits, governmental regulations or restrictions, and consumer backlash. Yeah, that's true. All right. So I guess this is a real risk. All right. Depending on servers and networks to operate games, if they lose functionality, business may be negatively impacted. Yeah. Okay. Failure of a disaster recovery service, failure of a company that they depend on, and their risk is pronounced for mobile games, for King. We have a small number of third-party data centers in one city? Oh my. Functioning of our proprietary online gaming service, Blizzard BattleNet. And all of Blizzard games depend on that so far, according to this. And then Activision content on the PC platform. Companies' multiplayer services. And they have hybrid data centers and cloud providers, and then insufficient server capacity. Okay, capacity issues. That's usually issue at launch of any new property. There's almost always capacity problems at launch of especially new big AAA content. Let's see. They rely on other platforms. Okay, if they go down, that's a problem. Cybersecurity attacks. Breaches. IT breaches. Network breaches. Malicious attacks. Are there any non-malicious attacks? I guess there are white hat attacks from time to time. Sorry, if you're not familiar with that. White hat means sort of like people who try to hack into a system or control a system for the purpose of showing that there is a vulnerability. When they go in, they do not do anything malicious. They do not do anything bad. They then will use the information they gained from the successful breach to either give that information to the company if they're a third party, or if they're in the company, they'll use it obviously internally to try to shore up that hole. Ideally, a white hat hack happens before a malicious attack, but sometimes they would be after, just to figure out like how it was done, I believe. So, okay. Data intrusions are problems. Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna skip over that because, like, yeah, hacking is a problem. Significant disruption during our live events may adversely affect our business. Large gatherings of people, risk of an actual or threatened terrorist act, riots or other safety or security issues, injury or death to attendees. Yeah, they could have an in-person event. So they do BlizzCon every year, or not this year, but usually they do a big convention. I mean, conceivably they could have a bomb attack or active shooter event. Those are the two most likely things, or even a truck driving through the convention hall is a possibility. Could you do that at the convention center they're at? I don't even know. I don't remember where they are. I think they're at the Anaheim Convention Center for that. I mean, people get creative when they want to do mass terrorist activities, so there's all kinds of things you could try to do. Catastrophic events may disrupt our business. Earthquakes. So they have a big corporate data center in LA. Catastrophic event. Significant expenditures. Maintain insurance coverage, but potential liabilities. Yeah, sometimes you can't insure for these things. Insurance only goes so far. System redundancy may be ineffective, or inadequate. This is a legit risk. This is definitely a legit risk. So this is going to be like, provisions in our corporate documents and Delaware state law could delay or prevent a change of control. Is this a risk or a choice? Interesting. So if someone wanted to try to take control of the company, that kind of allows the board of directors to prevent it. Issue and fix the rights and preferences of preferred stock. Is that a risk? Is that a risk? I guess it would be a risk to some of these big investors if someone wanted to try to come in and do a hostile takeover. It would be a risk to them. But is it really a risk? I feel like it's not. I mean, it's useful for them to explain it here. There's not a lot of places where they could say, hey, we've got this poison pill thing set up in our corporate documentation. We'll call that a risk for now. Interesting. All right, and then we've got regulatory and legal risks. Might be involved in legal proceedings with a negative impact on the business. Yeah, I bet you would. All kinds of audits and legal costs and uncertainty from those. I suppose so. Yeah. All right. I'm not gonna go over these too much. Maybe just talk about these. I talked about these in a prior video, so if you want a little bit more discussion about copyright, patent, trademark, and trade secrets and how those things get protected, go look at the business review, which is, I believe, part 2 and part 3. I probably discussed in both of those. Protecting these things is important, and there are different requirements for protecting each. And it's never certain. There are different levels of certainty for each of them. Business products and distribution are subject to increasing regulation in key territories. Yeah, you think so? Okay. So, advertising, intellectual property, antitrust, consumer privacy, accessibility. If you're not familiar with the term accessibility here, what they're referring to is accessibility for folks who have various different types of abilities. So, for example, say you're a gamer, but you only have you only have 3 fingers on each hand, right? Or if you're a gamer and you are colorblind, or you want to say you want to use a VR headset or an AR headset, but you're blind in one eye, or you have what do you call it? Speech impediment, and they have like voice to speech recognition kind of situation, or all kinds of things, right? Accessibility for gaming is a very complex topic, and oftentimes you will have folks who have combinations of accessibility issues. So there are increasing calls to provide accessible experiences, so we're not unnecessarily cutting people out of experiences. And increasingly those things are being better regulated, and industry folks are becoming more understanding that they don't really understand what differently abled folks are able to do and what they might need as a reasonable accommodation so that they can participate in the gaming environment. I think this is great. This is actually like, yeah, it's a risk, but it's like, is it really? Advertising, like, is it a risk? Taxation, is that a risk? Yeah, these things can change from time to time. The requirements can change. Like, regulation can sometimes have negative impacts, but it can also have positive impacts. So, and the negative impact may be for the business's monetary bottom line, but it may be positive in the long run, right? So there are gives and takes for all of these things. So I'm going to put plus or minus here, right? None of these things are net negative for humanity. Some of them may provide temporary declines in profit, for example. But again, I want to talk about that a little bit more. So each of these are compelling discussion points. We'll see how far I can get into this. I'm almost going for an hour now. I think I may take a pause for a moment. You won't even notice, but I'll be right back. I will have a drink of water at that point. Water. Or to do the Korean style. Sorry, all of you Koreans who had to watch me drink straight on. I don't understand actually why that's rude. I watch quite a lot of Korean dramas, and I see everybody doing this. But I don't get why. There has been no explanation of why that's the thing. Like, what is it about the drinking behavior that makes turning to the side more appropriate than drinking front on? I don't quite get it. If somebody knows the answer to that and has listened 58 minutes into my recording, can you please explain in the comments below? Because I would really like to know. All right, let's see. Maybe a Google search would fix that for me, but then it wouldn't nearly be as fun. Okay. Let's see. Foreign countries have laws that permit governmental entities to restrict or prohibit marketing or distribution of interactive entertainment software products and the content. Right. So yeah, you could be censored. They can prohibit your tournaments. Screen time issues, internet and mobile devices. Money laundering, may cover virtual currency or goods. I like that. That's funny. Yeah, that's true. That might, they might become a bank because they've got like currency on their site, in their games. A large antitrust fine on a number of game publishers who had been geo-blocking certain EU countries. Oh, I had not heard about that. Interesting. WHO included gaming disorder in their ICD, their International Classification of Diseases. I didn't know that there is a gaming disorder. I guess I am suffering from that. I'm probably not suffering from that. I don't mean to minimize any problems anyone is having if they actually are experiencing a gaming disorder. I don't mean to minimize that at all. If this is a real thing, if this is a real thing, I'm not gonna like. I don't mean to minimize it. I guess my question would be: is it specific to gaming? My guess would be gaming is a branch of habit disorder, some sort of habitual disorder that has gone wild. So people who engage in habitual gambling, gaming, maybe even like doom scrolling might even fall into this, like Facebook, like habitual Facebook reading, habitual Twitter reading. I feel like all these have similar feedback response systems. Maybe the treatment for them is different. Maybe that's why they classify them differently. But I feel like it's all one thing. Like compulsive behaviors around something that creates a negative impact on your life that's so bad that it requires psychiatric treatment or psychological treatment or something like that. I guess my question would be like, why gaming? And does that include gambling? Does that include like maybe it does? I don't know. I'm not a medical professional, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, but I suppose lots and lots of people could have this problem and it could be regulated and there could be changes that they're forced to make to their games, or certain games have to go off shelf because they are causing problems that are too big in society. So I don't know how big of an issue this is. I wonder. I wonder if it's a hidden big issue that we are not aware of. And it's being overshadowed by things like democracy collapsing in certain countries like the one I live in. Okay, let's see. Public dialogue, yeah, all right. Adoption and enforcement of legislation that restricts marketing content business model. May be required to modify development processes. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move on from that. Changing government regulations relating to the internet could negatively impact the business. They need significant levels of bandwidth to play games. This is true. Net neutrality is a good thing for them. Any problems with availability of bandwidth would negatively impact them. Okay. This is outside of their control. I would definitely call this a real risk. And this is something that actually happened in the United States in 2017. laws and regulations concerning data privacy are continually evolving. Failure to comply with the laws could harm the business. So they're talking about the U.S. Children's Online Privacy Protection Act and the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, California Consumer Privacy Act, and then other kinds of things like those. It's actually very difficult to comply with these things, just in a pragmatic sense. You're building a very complex piece of AAA content, right? And these, like, none of the designers are lawyers, usually. I mean, I doubt that any of the designers who are actually working day to day on these products are actually attorneys, right? And even among attorneys, the number of people who are intimately familiar with the General Data Protection Regulations or the COPPA or the California Consumer Privacy Act, like, there aren't a lot of people who are like really intimately familiar with all these things. And even then, like, there needs to be these feedback loops happening between designers and legal teams constantly, making sure that they're not doing anything they shouldn't be doing. There need to be trainings that happen, ethics reviews, code reviews. People need to know. So compliance with these things is actually kind of complex to organize and difficult to do. And they're not always logical. I don't want to use the term logical. So these regulations are here for a reason, right? And the regulators are trying to do right by kids or the public. And so they make rules and laws, and hopefully they're translated into better consumer products. That translation is a very complex feedback loop. The designers may not understand exactly what the regulators intended. Courts may not understand what the regulators intended. Customers may not realize what the regulators are trying to do. So, like, all of these people are going to have problems communicating with each other. And there's a lot of fumbling, I think, that's going to happen in the next few years as we attempt to try to grapple with things like online privacy and data protections and protecting our kids and keeping our currencies safe and keeping our environments free from hacking and keeping our consumer information private. All these things are sort of new things that came about in the last 20 years as the internet started to explode, right? So there's not a deep amount of knowledge among regulators, among the public about these things. So the people who are the best knowledgeable a lot of times are the people maybe who are writing the regulations, and then the people who work at companies like Activision Blizzard, Facebook, places like that. But typically these folks are like specialists on legal teams or compliance teams, right? And so they've got to translate this into like normal people talk so that they can explain this to developers who may not even share the same language as them. So there's or they may not share. Actually, no, they may not share the same language as them. They may not even speak English at all. They could, or they may maybe their second or third or fourth language. So there's a lot of work that has to happen and a lot of cultural understanding that has to be built. Okay, let's move on. Data privacy. This is all data privacy stuff. Okay. It's changing all the time. I get that. Yeah, substantial fines. Player interactions is subject to privacy policies, which nobody ever reads, and EULAs, who nobody ever reads, and terms of service that they almost never actually fulfill appropriately. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see how some of these things might cause risks for you. Like, online privacy policies and EULAs are the stupidest things ever. I don't even understand, like, why we haven't moved past these things as a culture yet. All right, games are subject to scrutiny regarding the appropriateness of their content. If we fail to receive our target ratings for certain titles, let's put that back in. Let's highlight this. If we fail to receive our target ratings for certain titles, or if our retailers refuse to sell the titles, it could have a negative impact on the business. Yeah, I guess. I'll let them call this a risk. Okay. Re-ratings, proprietary rating system. Retailers may decline to sell graphic violence, sexually explicit material. Okay. ESRB might get angry at them. As far as I know, Activision Blizzard doesn't sell anything with sexually explicit material. But there is quite a lot of violence. I don't know what they have planned. Maybe they're going to go down the sexual experience road at some point, but they seem to be much more focused on graphic violence. So that could be an issue. Okay, so financial and economic risks coming up next. So this is page 24 already. So still going with the risks. Wow. All right. Changes in tax rates. All right, I'm going to ignore that. Yeah, it could happen. Tax rates are always changing. Fluctuations in currency exchange rates. Again. All right, so I'm going to call these non-risks. Why? Why am I going to call these non-risks? Because these are things that always happen. They typically will happen to all members of a industry. Like, unless some authoritarian government or some non-authoritarian government decided to target Activision Blizzard specifically, or to kind of back into a specific issue with them, these tax rates and tax liabilities would apply based off of their behaviors and how they interact with the tax system. So it's like almost 100% choice. They almost always know what this is going to be in advance. And then governments are usually fairly transparent about saying what taxes are going to be beforehand. And there's usually a lot of talk about, are we going to be changing the tax system? Yes or no? There's votes and all that stuff. It's known about, right? And when it happens, it is almost always uniformly applied. And it hits all kinds of people. And then taxes by themselves are not always negative for a company, because tax rates can cause you to have like less money left over to call profits. But sometimes taxes go down, right? Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. Sometimes there are things you can do to alleviate those taxes. So for example, there's talk right now about subsidization of electric cars. So that if you have, I think the plan is that more subsidies will be for union produced automobiles, which would be a way for the government to encourage unionization in factories. Okay, I kind of see what they're going for right there. But again, all parties, all manufacturers are basically treated the same based off of whether they have that union shop or not. But it gives groups that don't have the union shop the opportunity to unionize. So again, it comes down to choices, right? Additionally, like tax rates could just change. They could go from 22% to 25%. Okay, but that happens to everybody, right? And then that tax money is used for things. It goes back into the economy, presumably, right? So some people, like most governments, don't just take that money and hoard it. Most of them are feeding it back. Maybe not now, but eventually in the next couple of years back into the economy. And they have plans. Maybe they're going to use it for medical, or maybe they're going to use it for additional like schools, or maybe even additional police, or whatever their plan is. It might be military, it might be whatever. But that money the money the government grabs tends to go back into the economy. Like they may build a bridge, they may hire employees, they may, open a museum. Whatever the government is going to do, that money can go back into society. So if that money is creating additional salaries for people, then some of those taxes that all companies are paying could conceivably increase the number of consumers that are available to buy things, games, perhaps. And then those additional gamers could be paying Activision Blizzard additional money. So when we say tax rates could change, that doesn't necessarily mean it's long-term bad for your company. So understanding the risk here is more than a short-sighted view of the thing that you're looking at. Okay, let's move on. Fundamental changes to tax laws. Yeah, sure. They could do that. Increasing the number that are enacted. Digital services taxes, yeah, that could be those. Again, a lot of times when taxes are enacted, there's a reason why. And so, like, for example, let's say a company is like, oh no, they're going to charge us more taxes because we use digital services. Well, let's say a country decides that they're going to decides that they have a problem, right? Their problem is they don't have enough bandwidth going to rural customers. Hello, United States. Not enough bandwidth to your rural customers. Maybe you should do something about that, guys and gals. Your votes matter. So, if we, as a group, decide we're going to do better and we're going to incentivize companies to build bandwidth out to these areas, or we're going to penalize them, or a combination of both, right? If they don't do it, or we just build it on our own as we build roads out to those locations or whatever. Like we figure some way out that makes sense that we could get that bandwidth out to those people. We may decide to add a tax for it. We, humanity, not we, the United States. I don't know what they're planning on their thing. If a country decided to add a digital services tax so that the infrastructure and the bandwidth of the internet was safeguarded, that's a net positive for all the players in the marketplace. So if something is targeted at your company because you're kind of using the commons, the public services, and you're using it a lot, and then the money is going to be used to do better with those services, that creates a positive feedback loop, right? More customers for you, better experiences for those customers, things like that. So again, can't say whether this is net good, net bad, long term. Short term, maybe a hit. Long term, maybe great. Is it a risk? I think it's more complex than that. It's more complex than saying it's just a risk. It's definitely a change. But a change is not necessarily always a risk. And then currency exchange rates. Yeah, currencies change. You want to do business in other countries, you're going to be doing business in multiple currencies. It's a fact of the way the world works. I guess it is a risk, but it's also a choice. You don't have to do business outside of the country that you're based in. You want to. I don't know. I guess it's more of a risk. I don't know. I guess it's good that they include it here. When I think of risks, I don't think of that necessarily. The collapse of a currency, that's a risk to me. Full-on collapse of a currency, or huge amounts of inflation or deflation in a currency. Yeah, I think that could be an issue. But fluctuating exchange rates, that's normal course of business. So that's the difference. Like a real huge impact or modest impacts that happen on a sort of predictable basis quarter by quarter. Reported financial results could be significantly impacted by changes in financial accounting standards or by the application of existing or future accounting standards to our business as it evolves. Okay, so what they're talking about here is the accounting policies changes. And this is called, what's the acronym that they use? GAAP, right? So we refer to this as GAAP standards, generally accepted accounting principles. If this changes, it changes the way they report stuff. And changes are made on a regular basis as the standards are updated, modernized. But I don't actually see this as a risk to the organization. It is a philosophy of how we do the math around, like the accounting policies don't actually affect the business's results. Like Activision has designers that make games. They sell those games to customers. Customers play the games, and they buy more games that the designers made. Like, this is the business. Through this all, people are changing money. Money's moving back and forth. At the end of the day, how we account for the money inflows and outflows, and whether we call something profit, whether we call it a particular line item on an expense sheet, whether it's part of capital appreciation or whatever we're going to call it, it doesn't actually change all those behaviors and things that are happening. It just changes how it gets accounted for. If you see what I'm going for, right? Like, if something counts as profit this year, but because of GAAP standards changing, it doesn't count as profit next year, has the business fundamentally changed? I would say no. I would say the real risk is when GAAP standards don't actually show things that in a way that you would consider realistic, I guess. But like all this is sort of like shifting things from bucket to bucket, but you're carrying a truckload of buckets. And you as an investor, me as an investor, I care about the truckload of buckets, not what bucket the fish are in. I don't know where this analogy is going, buckets of fish. I'm a paddler. I think about fish and buckets a lot. We have to, yeah. Okay. So the insolvency of business failure of any of our business partners could negatively impact us. Yeah, actually, this is great. This is a good risk. Good risk. Something collapsing could be a big problem. So we'll make a big exclamation mark here. Let's say one of their big, make a little ice cream cone exclamation mark. This is a really bad exclamation mark. That is an exclamation mark, not Vermont. Okay. Let's see. Bankruptcy laws. Right. Yeah, customers could go bankrupt. Okay, whatever. I get it. Products and services are discretionary spending. General economic decline could be bad for them. Really? Really? I beg to differ. So, yes, discretionary spending. Yes. But, I've seen it reported that, obviously I'm not old enough to have experienced this. I've seen it reported that during the Depression in the 30s, 20s and 30s, the movie theater business boomed because people wanted an escape hatch. They needed something to remind them what it was to be happy, to get away from their cares. So the hypothesis that a lot of industry watchers had from that time period was that the reason why people went to the movies so much in that time was because it was rough. During COVID, we've seen the same thing happen. So Netflix was hugely popular during COVID. People engaged in quite a lot of gaming during the lockdown, and we had some severe economic declines. We're right now in the midst of a fantastic worldwide supply shortage, or I guess it's a logistics problem. Combination of both things. So you've got the logistics challenges leading to failure to create proper supplies. I was reading today about failures to get chemicals for farming, presumably for either pesticides or for what's the term? Fertilizer. Yes, pesticides or fertilizers, stuff like that. Also, a lot of talk about global chip shortages, right? Some kinds of chips are in extraordinarily high demand. We're having problems making the chips, getting them where they need to go. So, because we are in a general economic decline right now, shouldn't Activision Blizzard be doing worse? Sales-wise, they're not, but in the press and in public perception they are, but that's not necessarily because of the supply chain issues. It's really because these days it's because they mistreat their employees, allegedly. I say the word allegedly ironically because I believe the allegations, but that's for me to say. I guess I'm not a court. I don't want to. I don't want to get myself sued by Activision Blizzard necessarily, but I think they've got some proving to do. I think they've got some significant proving to do to make me not believe that they've got major problems internally. Allegedly. Okay. Discretionary spending. Yes. But I feel like if they're bad times, one of the most cost-effective means of finding an escape is games. A lot of them you can buy once and play many, many, many hundreds of hours without problems. So entertainment and escape becomes very high in demand when people are having rough times. So I don't think that this is the same risk that they're saying it is. I just don't. One B, unresolved staff content properties. Oh, wow, we got through it. Oh, boy. Wow, we got through risks. Okay, cool. So, what's missing? What's missing? So let's think about this a little bit. There's almost nothing in here talking about well, actually, no, there was. Let's scroll back up. There was a section on making sure that their team members are essentially happy or content. I'll say content. Okay. Okay. My thoughts on risk. My thoughts on risk. So to me, Risk is not a matter of when, but if. What do I mean by this? If I see something coming, if I know something is probably going to happen, all right, let me rephrase this. So I've seen it explained that risks are things that are unexpected. They're things that you can't necessarily plan for because they're kind of out of the realm of the normal. They're a little bit harder to figure out whether or when they're going to happen. You don't, there are a lot of question marks about them. You don't know maybe even whether or not they're going to negatively impact you every time. There are things that you've seen happen in other industries, or maybe even in your own industry, or maybe just in history, and you're like, yeah, that could happen. And if it did, we think that that could have a negative impact on our business. And I think this is the reason why most people avoid looking at these sections. I think most people look at these sections and they scan down it and they're like, yeah, bad shit could happen. And if bad shit happens, bad shit happens. That's why we do things like diversify our holdings into multiple industries, diversify our holdings beyond one company into dozens of companies instead, right? So when I think about investing, I don't think about investing in one or two companies. I think about investing in 30 or 40 companies. That's investing. Investing in or buying one or two companies is more like gambling, right? You're depending a lot on those companies at that point, and you're making some pretty bold statements to yourself and your family about what you think is the future, right? You're basically saying these companies are the future. I trust them with my life, literally, because your money is, for most of us, your money is your life. It allows you to clothe, house, feed, take care of yourself, get around. Like, it's, having money is freedom. So if you're investing and you're trying to keep yourself going, you want to, like, beyond your working years, you want to try to be in a situation where, why is this? It's just irritating me. There we go. You want to be in a situation where maybe you're actually going to be able to take care of yourself. And to do that, you need money. Depending on one or two companies to deliver that to you is, I would say, irresponsible. And that's why people talk so much about diversification. And it means different things when you have different amounts of money. Diversification means something different when you're a multimillionaire or a billionaire. You just don't need to diversify as much when you have tons of cash lying around, or when you have tons of, when you have significant amounts of money in a broad group of stocks, but you may have a concentration in one or two. If those one or two stocks fall, yeah, you could lose a lot of money, but it doesn't take you out entirely because you have diversification in other areas. So risk for me has that kind of component. I think about that component sometimes, where it's like something unexpected could happen, but I don't always know if that unexpected thing is going to be bad or good for the company. And then there's a different kind of risk. And there's the risk that it's the risk of things that we ignore, things that we are aware of, little things that bleed off our money day by day. Inflation, for example, is not something that's typically characterized as a risk because in the United States, the Federal Reserve regulates our currency and they have a target inflation of 2 to 3% annually. So they've basically said, hey, this is what we're aiming for. It's essentially a tax or a management fee on cash. So if you're keeping your money in cash, you're going to lose 2 to 3% of its value every year in terms of purchasing power. And it has nothing to do with wages. This was something that was shocking to me when I was learning about inflation, because I was like, well, isn't there a thing called wage inflation? No, I don't believe there actually is. There's a thing called wages, right? And they track wages. So wages as a general amount is being tracked. And so you can, like the Fed or whoever, or these economic folks in the United States, they'll track wages as a general thing. But they don't talk about it in terms of inflation and the cost of, because it's sort of embedded in the cost of goods. So you can think of wages as being part of cost of goods and services. So the consumer price index in its various iterations and inclusion of things or disinclusion of things should reflect the cost of those wages. But from my standpoint as a person who makes money, I care a lot about wage inflation. What I call wage inflation, what I think of as like change in wages over time. Like I want to see wages going up on a regular basis over time. The Fed pays attention to this, but they don't manage to it, and you can tell because wages have stayed relatively stagnant for the last 40 years or something. And that's why there's so many calls to do things like get to the $15 minimum wage in so many states and also in the federal government. So I see this change in the value of your dollar, where your dollar is actually buying you a little less every year, as a risk that we all kind of ignore. It's stated, it happens. It's not a question mark as to whether or not it's going to happen. It's their goal. It's what they're aiming for. It's not a surprise if we have a 3% inflation in a year. That's literally their intention at the Fed. So it's a surprise when you get 5% inflation or 7% inflation in a year. That would be a bit of a surprise, I suppose. But they have controls, dials that they can turn to increase or decrease the money supply, increase or decrease lending, that sort of thing, right? So there are things that they can do at the federal government level and at the Fed, at the Federal Reserve Bank to change these things. So another kind of thing like that you would not typically think of is something like trading fees, right? So I guess there's a lot of $0 trading fees right now, but back when I started investing, they would charge you several dollars to make any trade, right? And so there's this friction. You're like, I'm doing the thing and I hit this friction point. I'm getting a $5 charge, $5 charge, $5 charge every time I trade, right? There are little bits of friction like this scattered throughout our economy and scattered throughout the world, right? So each of these things, inflation, trading fees, taxes, things like this, they're kind of like constant low-level drains on funds. Not risks necessarily, I suppose, because they're expected. So they're not always called out in here, but they're like business expenses that you kind of can predict on a regular basis. I think of both of these things as risks, because if you're not careful about those more silent, hidden things, they can become substantial risks for you, particularly as an individual investor, right? It may not be something that they're calling out in here, and it may not even be something I want to talk about that much in here, but for you personally, there is a risk for you if you're not paying attention. You need to know those things. All right, so we've gone through and we've kind of itemized each of the risks here. Let's talk about some things I think that they're not talking about. So they didn't call out biological attacks. They didn't, at least I don't think they did. There's a catastrophe section. So there's like any generic catastrophe. Every catastrophe is different. An earthquake in a locality is not the same kind. So for example, if there's an 8-point earthquake in Los Angeles, that's bad. Like Los Angeles could be taken down depending on the location, right? So there could be a huge catastrophe in Los Angeles. That's where they're headquartered. That would be really bad for them. They could have a lot of deaths on their staff. Their company could basically go under. There's a huge difference between 8-point or 8.4 earthquake is what I'm looking for in Los Angeles, and an 8.4 earthquake in, say, Houston or Bermuda. I don't know if they get quakes in Bermuda. Somewhere in China, right? Does it matter the same? I would say it doesn't, right? Not because it's not a horrible loss of life, but because Activision Blizzard's not directly infected by it, right? So civil unrest in Santa Monica, where they're located, could be a significant risk for them. They could lose their building in a fire. People could lose their lives on the streets. Police action on the streets in Santa Monica could do the same thing. However, those same things happening in another country, and they're happening all over the world, well, not all over the world, they're happening at points around the world right now, do not pose the same risk, right? So they're not actually calling out these sort of locality-related risks in here in a precise enough manner for me. So where are these data centers? Maybe they're keeping them secret on purpose. They don't note that. Like what one city do they have all these data centers in for King Digital that I think they mentioned? I don't know. Are they in Houston? Are they in Tucson? Are they in New York? I don't know. If there is a catastrophe and I see something on the news, will I know if it's affecting these data centers? Do I know to be worried? I don't actually know. So this risk section is like, yeah, something bad could happen. We're not going to tell you exactly where our stuff is, except for our main headquarters. So you're basically at our mercy to tell you if something actually bad does happen that affects us. Do you really actually have a good understanding of what the risks are without knowing where these things are physically located? Because a lot of risks are physical in nature. Also, in terms of the digital risks, there's a lot of vagueness, right? How much of their code is actually sourced from these open sourced software systems, and are they making any attempts to either shore up the open sourced licenses or to kind of safeguard that code or review that code? Are they doing, like, what actions are they taking to safeguard these risks? I don't know. There's not a whole lot of explanation in here about it. They're basically saying, yeah, something bad could happen, but we don't necessarily know what it is. So some of the criticisms, a lot of the criticisms I have about these things is basically like, they're saying, yeah, there could be something that's going on. You don't have specific information, and it's really difficult to make any judgments based off of it because of that. And then there are other things like that are completely business focused, that while they don't feel like risks to me in the same way. So for example, if I was to create a product, the Lazy Paddler Investor Show, for example, and encourage people to watch my product, the lead time and cost associated with producing this product will vary, and my returns will vary based off of my performance. This is true. This is capitalism. This is what we all participate in on a daily basis. Yes, I could do a bad job. They could do a bad job as well. They could make less money. I could make less money. I make no money off this show right now, so no worries there. I'm not going to make more or less significantly depending on anything happening anytime soon, it looks like, which is great. For them, yeah, they could have more or less sales in a particular period. Is that a risk? It's kind of like just the way business works, right? Like, do you need to explain that to me? Like, I feel like that's just like capitalism. Don't I write that somewhere here? This is definitely a risk, the fact that they have a small number of franchises. But as an individual investor, this doesn't bother me. And why doesn't it bother me? Because I'm diversified, right? So I know that they're primarily World of Warcraft, Call of Duty, and Candy Crush. None of which I play, really. I mean, I play a little bit of Call of Duty years and years ago, but I haven't for years. I haven't even, like, maybe I'll buy a new one this year, but I doubt it. I don't think I'm even going to Jones to play that game, which is why I'm reducing my exposure to Activision Blizzard, because they no longer really are supporting the things I care about. And they're not making new games that I care about. They have not announced anything that I really care about. I guess that's a risk for them. They could lose me. I could talk bad about them. Is that really a risk? I don't even know. I feel like, again, this is business. I don't worry about this so much. I don't worry about it so much. I know it. It's good of them to say it, but they've already mentioned it in their how they run their business thing. This is a huge risk for them. This is about motivating personnel, attracting and retaining people. And they say continue. Somehow I doubt that people who are not white men feel welcome at their company. I doubt it. If you're from Activision Blizzard and you want to contest that below, feel free. But if you're a white man, don't bother. I'd rather hear from folks who are not. Oh, skilled personnel, that's what that is. Let's move that off. Skilled personnel. Yeah, this is a huge problem right now. I would also say that for them, all these layoffs and restructurings, and even the acquisition of King Digital, they're business decisions, right? There's, I suppose, some question whether those are good business decisions or bad. So I suppose the risk is it could be bad, and the positive is it could be good. but it's not the kind of risk where you don't understand that it's there. Like, like it's not an externally created risk. They created these risks on their own. When you lay people off, you're creating a risk. When you buy a new company, you're creating a risk for yourself. But that's like that standard capitalist risk that I don't know. I feel like there are two different kinds of risk here. That's how I think about it. It's like the capitalist risk and like general environmental risk. And the two things are significantly different from each other. I don't know. It just bugs me when they're treated. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be so angry about this. I don't know why. Rapid technological change. Well, yeah, we expect you to deal with rapid technological changes. That's the business. Again, this is capitalism. Technology changes. You're in the business of forecasting and building games out for years. That's your business. Do it well or do it poorly. You've got to accept those things. Like this isn't the same kind of risk as, oh my gosh, my building burned down. Or, oh my gosh, we got hacked. And someone took all of your personal information and now no one wants to buy games from us because we're like bad at security. Digital sales risk. And competition. I'm like, again, it doesn't feel like a risk to me. It just feels like the way the winds are blowing. You can catch the wind in your sails or you can get knocked over, I suppose. But I feel like this is one of those things that's always happening, right? There's always a move toward digital sales now. Once the floodgates were open for digital sales, it's just not going to end. Retail sales probably will continue, and yeah, they're going to have some chances of, earning less, earning more. I don't know if I would call that a risk necessarily. Yeah, capitalism. These are all these capitalist risks. Third-party providers, business as usual. Like, yeah. All this stuff is like, yeah, we could make less money. They could sum all of this stuff up in our business decisions might be good, they might be bad. We could make less money this year and we could make more money this year. And it all depends on our business decisions around who we're going to sell through, what kind of content we're going to make, what kind of companies we're going to acquire. I think they could summarize all this really, really quickly and just say, look, this is capitalism. We're going to do our best, but the real risks are things like catastrophe, hacking, assault. Oh, there's something else that they haven't talked about here. They did talk about black hat hacking, but they didn't talk about government-sponsored hacking. I think they should add that. What else aren't they talking about? I guess the catastrophe one is sort of a generic thing. COVID-19 would be considered a catastrophe, but again, not necessarily a negative for them, as we'll see when we get to their sales results for 2020. Again, all these self-inflicted wounds, potentially, just results of capitalism. I'm not super worried about those. It's kind of like if you trust them, you should be happy. If you trust them, like Christmas is going to turn out okay for you and for the people who buy the stuff. If you don't trust them, then it's not. you're basically thinking it's not going to turn out well, but it's all borne out in the end. When you see the results, you'll find out later, kind of thing. But there's always the possibility that we do better or worse. I don't see that as the same kind of risk, though. Again, leaks could be bad, they could be good. Public disclosures could be bad, they could be good. Operations disruptions, probably bad. Probably bad. Open source software, I'm not sighing because of that. Open source software, again, I think probably is a good thing to call out here. When I've dealt with that in the past, it's been quite complex, and you don't always get authorization to reuse things that you had before, so it can complicate development quite a bit when you have to change to new software. Because something becomes unsupported, or because it becomes something that you can't buy anymore for either contractual reasons, or because it's developed by people that your company doesn't trust, or because it's not in the proper market created, like it may be in a country where you can't sue appropriately if there are issues, whatever. Then the Chinese and other, like the Russians, other groups that do a lot of censorship could censor your stuff. And they could just call you out. They could just cancel you, essentially. They could cancel all contracts with you through the company, through the country. I don't mean cancel like the social media cancel. I mean like literally they could cancel all your actions, all your contracts within a country by law. They can say, Activision, you're out of China. Activision, you're out of Russia. This is actually a much higher level of risk than all these other things. It's not the same kind of economic risk, and it's more of a political kind of thing. And this is an interesting one. You'll run into this sometimes, especially with financial services companies. Typically, companies will not allow bribery or use of funds or coercion in their business transactions. However, in some countries, bribery is how you get things done. So some creative things need to happen to be sure to grease the wheels with the appropriate folks. I don't know what the reality is of some of these situations. And I think that in general, we as American citizens are not used to seeing bribery as like a day-to-day event. Me and my fellow Americans, I guess. If you're not in the United States, maybe this is more something that you see. I don't know, but like day to day, I do not see people asking for bribes. Like police are not going to ask me for a bribe. Like someone coming to my house to do a review of my architecture is not going to ask me for a bribe. Like I don't have to pay some like public servant a bribe so I can set up my whatever. I don't have to bribe people so I can set up business accounts with them. I like financial services companies are very ethical. Like this is what people value about the United States in terms of our ethics rules. It's great. It's not true everywhere. Things are done differently in different countries. I'm not gonna harangue anyone because but I know this because it was talked about at my prior work, and they're basically like, we know we don't let you do this. Don't do it. Even if it's common in the countries that you work with, just don't do it. Let us know what's going on, and we'll try to work with you to find out like what we can do legally. Complying with all these anti-bribery laws and things like that. Sometimes things can be done, sometimes they can't. Sometimes you just can't do business in a certain location. These little hidden Easter egg things is funny. That's definitely a risk. Server collapse is interesting. I feel like it would be useful for me as a investor to know where, at least what state, well, at least like within a 100-mile radius, where these data centers are. I know from a security standpoint, it's important not to let bad actors know where your data is physically located, because people can target you. However, it is, I think it's like something I'd like to see legislation on, a disclosure of at least a general like circumference of where a data center could be. I think that would be useful, because I would like to know, like, is there data center in LA, or is it in Arizona, or is it in Florida? I want to know, so that if like something happens, I can be like, oh wow, that's going to be a problem for them or not. I don't want to be dependent on them 100% for like announcing that to me after the fact. They are required to, but I can see a lot of them not. Okay, we've talked about a lot of this stuff. I've talked about my philosophy. I've talked about the differences between different types of risk that I think of. Legal risks. All right, there's another kind of risk I want to talk about, and that's risk that impacts everybody in an industry. So I've talked about risks where, like, yeah, you might end up paying more taxes, but that's not necessarily a net negative, right? Because more people may be able to be your customers because of that. Or maybe it does things to help your ecosystem. Or maybe it helps bring competition to the market. Sometimes companies say, oh, competition is bad. Sorry, that's my alarm. I got to finish up. But competition is not always bad. Sometimes competition is actually great for both parties, or many of the parties that are involved in the competition, right? Because it actually encourages everybody to do better, and especially if there's enough marketplace for all the players, and especially if the players can kind of work together a little bit every now and then to do things like or have government support or something, right? So for example, automobile manufacturers all benefit from government roads. They all benefit from common unions. They all benefit from having access to regulated financial institutions, right? So they all benefit from all these things that are managed by either society or taxes or whatever that's sort of common, right? And having those things isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes it's a net positive for everybody involved. So, things to consider. Anyhow, I'm going to wrap us up. We're going to jump to the end of this section here and mark us. We're getting ready to go into item 2. There are no unresolved staff comments here. We're going to go into properties, legal proceedings, and jump to, what's the next big section here? Yeah, we'll start getting into the stock and selected financial data next time. This should be fun. I'll bring out some displays that we're going to be doing. We're going to be starting on item 1B, unresolved staff comments, next time. Thank you for sticking around with me. I've loved talking with you or to you. Leave some comments down below. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.